Hello, everyone. Oh, I just realized, how did everything move on me? Oh, because I kicked my screen back. All right. Happy Friday. I apparently kicked my monitor back, and so now everything is like a little bit off the right place. So I don't know. Everything's a little bit strange. I don't know why. I feel like I set everything up in a way that it should just be. And then for whatever reason, it's not as the moment goes. So happy Friday, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to Plant Consciousness Commentary. I'm Tigrilla Gardenia. I need a break. This is, you could tell that we are in a change of season. We're in equinox season. We're getting into it. For some of you have already celebrated the equinox. Here in Damanhur, we celebrate it at least twice. And so we celebrated it yesterday in the Sacred Woods Temple with the equinox ritual. And there will be another ritual on Sunday, which is when I'm going to do it. And so I can feel myself completely inside of the equinox energy. And so I am kind of like filled with ideas and totally excited and working on so many different things that really catch my attention, and I love it. And then I need quiet time. And it's this interesting switch that happens. I don't want to call it overwhelm because it's not really overwhelm, although it's easy to mistake it for overwhelm. But it's more like my body gets this burst of energy that it works through, and then it really needs that rest and quiet and such. And so since last night, I was working on a project with one person, and then afterwards went straight to go hang out with a good friend of mine, which was a wonderful evening. And then today I was like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get all these things done? So we're here. Hello, everyone. If you're new around here, welcome. Say hello. Tell us where you're coming from. You know, all the YouTube-y stuff too, the like, the subscribe, the all things. I'm Tigrilla Gardenia. I am a nature-inspired mentor and a leadership coach. Not a leadership coach anymore, a life coach. Well, that's true. I'm always a leadership coach and a life coach. But basically, I specialize in helping creative, multi-passionates who feel scattered, hence why I know that this isn't really scattered, but it is filled with so many ideas. And so I work and help them to turn basically all of that kind of complexity into clarity and one unifying thread. And I do it with the help of the plant Kinhome. And so here we are in Plant Consciousness Commentary, what I hope will be the last the last commentary session in this series. I am extremely excited with the hope of finishing it. So if you're new and you haven't seen any of this, let me give you a kind of rundown of where we are. So over the last about 7 or 8 sessions, this stretched out way longer than I expected it to. We have been going over a paper that was written by Paco Calvo and Manuel Segundo-Ortin. My goodness. Okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to take some tea. Give me a sec. Okay, that's better. Okay, so let's try again. In these sessions, we have been going through papers that was kicked off by a paper that was written in Animal Sentience by Paco Calvo and Miguel Segundo-Ortin about plant sentience. And basically the entire gist of their paper was between Romanticism and belief, there's science. And so they go through and they break down, scientifically speaking, why they believe that we can easily and without any kind of worry or concern understand that plants are sentient and accept that plants are sentient. But in order for them not to just say it themselves, what they did was they asked for a call out, and they asked for feedback. And so they invited people, whomever, scientific community, to reply. And what we have been doing is going through all those replies. So we went through the original paper, and then afterwards we have been going one by one through all of the replies. We have now finished the replies, and last week we started what I honestly thought we were going to finish, their updated paper, which basically is their reply to all the replies. So we're on the reply of the replies, and we're on part 2 of the replies of the replies. Now, honestly, this entire series has been fantastic. I highly encourage you to go over to the Plant Consciousness commentary playlist. If you're in YouTube, you can also find it on my website, as well as inside of the Naturally Conscious community. There's an entire section for Plant Consciousness commentary that lists out all the different sessions that we have had around this. It is fascinating. It is fantastic. And it has been extremely interesting because it basically comes down to 3 different camps. Camp number 1 is hardcore plant physiologists and animal neurobiologists who say, absolutely not. Plants are not sentient. They never will be sentient. There's no reason for us to be even having this discussion. This is not a necessary conversation to be having. No. Okay. And there are many different reasons why that happens. On the other side, there are those that are like, hey, plants are sentient, and here are the reasons why, which are not exactly the yes. Segundo-Ortin and Calvo put out some really great argument as to why they think of it, using kind of the animal neurobiology and many of the psychology and philosophical arguments that we use today to understand the sentience of animals. But that's not what we need for plants, because plants are not like animals. And so therefore we believe in this other column, like we believe that plants are sentient. We believe that plants are sentient because plants are sentient the way plants are sentient, and the way other species, non-human species and non-animal species, are sentient. And therefore here are different ways to approach sentience that will help us better understand plants. So 2 camps over here, and then there's the camp in the middle that says, we're not against the idea that plants might be sentient. What we're saying is, though, that the arguments that they put forth are either not applicable because of the fact that you are taking animal arguments and applying it to plants, or they don't show what you think they're going to show. They don't show it because of time scale. They don't show it because just because you have something that a plant is doing, you can't understand the volition or the will, or if it's really a choice, all these different things that are necessary for sentience. Now, we're about halfway through the reply to the replies, the reply to the replies, yes, singular to plural, which basically goes through and details out from Segundo-Ortin and Calvo why the people who are kind of in the first camp are like dead ass wrong. And I was surprised, not everybody was surprised, but I was surprised that they double down on their like, no, plants are sentient. And last week, so if you go to last week's stream, you will see me, that they kind of break everything down. Like if you're a tiny little child, like they really did, the whole meme of like, explain something to me like I'm a kindergartner. They did that, and they have been going through, and this paper, it's a little bit more technical where we are right now, but it's very much breaking all of this argument down as if you were a small child. So it's very easy to understand to a certain extent. Obviously, you have to have some knowledge about plants and such. But a lot of the comments that they're making is the goalpost keeps changing. In other words, every time we get closer, we show something that plants are doing that basically shows sentience in any other species. In other words, in any animal species, non-human animal species would show sentience. All of a sudden you say, oh no, that doesn't count for a plant. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of misunderstanding the fact that the physiology between one and another are completely different, and therefore you have to adapt. So there's this thing of like, oh, well, there's no nervous system and there's no brain, so obviously there's no sentience. And it's like, is that really the way we want to measure sentience in plants? Like, maybe you're applying this wrong. You're not taking, the right look, which they're not just going by metaphor, an analogy, which is one of the arguments against the idea of plant sentience, but they're saying, take the metaphor, the analogy, and use that to adapt to the physiology, and therefore the physiology gets you there. So I am very proud of, Paco and Miguel, who are kind of saying, screw all of you, we're going to show you again, like if you're a child, because you're obviously not getting it, that sorry, like, you obviously are not getting it that this is happening. By the way, this sweater, I mean, anybody who watches any kind of my live streams or who sees me on video often will often see me wearing this sweater. This is my Mr. Rogers sweater. You know how like anybody who grew up in that era and they would see, Mr. Rogers come in to the house, or, you would see this like concept of like you show up at the house, you sit down, you take off your shoes, you put on your slipper, you put on your favorite little sweater, like something to be that's comfy and cozy at home. This is my comfy cozy at home. So below this, I have actually my regular like clothes. But this is what I throw on whenever I feel a little bit chilly or when I want to cozy. So I always say I'm going to take it off before I stream because, as a streamer, you want to have, you want to look really nice and you want to have, and I'm like, you know what? This is what I wear at home. Like, this is my home clothes. This is what I love to like be cozy in and be really comfortable in. And I have my tea, which today is a kind of, I don't even remember what country it's from. I think it's from Serbia. It's like a Serbian berry tea, not tree. And that's where we are. So I'm going to get into this because we are only halfway through. And last time it took us it took us 2 hours to get through the other first half. Again, go watch the videos. They're all linked in the show notes below that you can watch to watch all the others if you haven't seen them. And off we go. So I'm going to share my screen. We start already on number 6. So again, in the previous ones, I do link to the paper so that you can always see it. And so I'm starting off on page 6. We had a problem last week where apparently my network connection. So for those of you that don't know, I live in the middle of nowhere. It's not true. I live in one of the largest spiritual communities in the world, which is Damanhur in Italy, but we happen to be at the foothills of the Alps. And lately the internet here is not so hot. So I have had various streams where at some point it stops transmitting. So when I went back to the recording last time it started to do this and I ended up having to shut the stream down. I started up a new one, but then I realized the time and how far we still had to go. And so I shut off the second one and I said, you know what, I'm just going to go back and I'll start this stream from like, the most stoppable place that first stream ended in. So you don't have to worry about watching the second one because we're going to get into it. So this is number 6 on the list. If you remember, let's see if I can get back. Hold on a second. I got to change the view. It's the one thing I don't like about this. And it's like, okay, let me change. Basically, the paper, where is it? It's the abstract. Basically, they've outlined like a few major things. The double standard, which we already talked about, is one piece of this. And that was a very big piece, a very good one. Anthropomorphizing and zoomorphizing. So they talk about the fact that many of the arguments that were made don't make sense because you're anthropomorphizing, and at the same time they're being accused of anthropomorphizing. So it's like you don't use an animal example, then people say, oh, this isn't valid because you don't have anything to weigh it against. But if you do use an animal example, then they say you're anthropomorphizing, and they're like, again, it's kind of a double standard. Plus all the testing is very zoocentric, and so it doesn't work. Number 4 was all about words and definitions. And it was all of the argumentation, which when we walked through all the papers, was a lot about how do you define the word sentience? How do you define consciousness? How do you define cognition? And how much the parsing of the words is the excuse that's being used to not recognize who plants are and what plants do and how plants are active. Was on the definition of cognition itself. So not just one was sentience, and now the word cognition, which is an entire other world, because the realm of plant psychology is still to a certain extent not a very codified world. It doesn't have these standard definitions that exist. So now we're more on redefinitions and disanalogies. Get deeper into this part. All right. So in comparative cognition, there is a risk that key concepts are used rather idiosyncratic ways. This has been stressed by Mallet et al., us with. Now, mind you, Mallet et al. Had Mallet, Lincoln ties, and a few others. These are the staunch first category. Plants are not sentient. Plants can never be sentient. It doesn't make any sense for us to have a conversation. Your philosophical arguments are just hot air. Your physiological arguments are wrong. And there's no brain and there's no central nervous system. This is kind of like the very synthetic, the very synthetic. My gosh, I can't speak today. I should really change the date that I do this, because doing this on Fridays, I always get stuck on that. Like, how much do I actually speak clearly? So being concise, we're just going to change the word altogether. That's kind of the synthesis of what they say. So they charge Paco and Miguel into redefining standard neuropsychological terms, giving them unfamiliar meanings to fit plant behaviors. Remember, I've already talked that this is one of their kind of sticking points. The same is argued concerning some cognitive capacities, such as decision-making. Mallet et al. Note, decision-making in standard definitions involves minds and mental pondering, making up one's mind as to an opinion, a course of action, etc. But S&C use the following redefinition of Reed et al. That does not require a mind as a central controller. The action by an entity or individual organism or group of selecting an option from a set of alternatives based on characteristics of alternatives that the entity can perceive. Again, as with cognition, oh wait, hold on. I want to look something. Where did I write that? I got to find it. You will see me. Dang it, that's not where it is. I have pieces of paper all over the place. I have to find the piece of paper while we're talking where I had I'll find it. So I'll get to it in a second, because there's an analogy connected to this that I want to share that's super interesting. Anyway, again, as with cognition, Mallet et al.'s criticism assumes that there is a universally accepted definition. We hope we all agree that, regardless of the direction of the debate, the Oxford English Dictionary, because they cited the Oxford English Dictionary, which personally, I love the Oxford English Dictionary. But from an academic perspective, in the sciences, in particular in the biological sciences, I'm not sure it's the right reference for you to hit. So the Oxford English Dictionary is not the appropriate reference to resolve the matter. Elsewhere, we have discussed plant decision-making at length. Recent studies suggest that even non-neural organisms, like bacteria, exhibit decision-making abilities, as indicated by markers that are commonly accepted in the human and non-human animal literature. In this literature, decision-making is typically understood as the process of choosing between multiple behavioral options based on the information gathered. Evidence from bacterial behaviors, particularly E. coli, shows that they can switch behaviors adaptively on the basis of environmental cues, a process that mirrors decision-making in more complex organisms. Remember, I told you that one of the arguments is the fact that the goalpost keeps changing. So even though they keep finding things that would be equivalent to sentience in the animal world, then these other scientists keep saying, oh, no, but that doesn't count when it talks to plants, because there's no brain and no central nervous system. It's really, honestly, quite frustrating. Let's see. Oh, where did I lose my paper? Recent studies suggest that even non-neural organisms like bacteria exhibit decision-making abilities as indicated by markers that are commonly accepted in the human and non-human animal literature. This literature, decision-making is typically understood as the process of choosing between multiple behavioral options based on the information gathered. Evidence from bacterial behavior, particularly E. coli, shows that they can switch behaviors adaptively on the basis of environmental cues, a process that mirrors decision-making in more complex organisms. These bacteria utilize distributed control systems to evaluate and respond to their environment without a centralized system. Control systems do not always follow a hierarchical pattern where mechanisms are arranged in ascending level of control. Instead, they are sometimes arranged hierarchically. meaning that they can operate somewhat independently without a centralized governing body gathering, processing, and acting on information about the internal and external states of the organism. Contrary to what is commonly believed, current neurophysiological evidence indicates that mammalian brains realize this hierarchical organization as well, and that many sophisticated human decisions could result from hierarchical neural control systems. For a detailed analysis, see these. This decentralized approach challenges Mallet et al.'s traditional view that decision-making requires a central executive mechanism. In apparent agreement with Mallet et al. That the way we use concepts is problematic and somewhat pseudoscientific, Struett, who is another one of the papers, writes, definitions and concepts that are commonly used in work on human cognition and sentience are stretched to make them broad enough to also include plant phenomena. The case is then built from there, mainly from indirect and weak evidence, or no evidence at all, speculating mainly from further analogy. The result is that there is a set of slightly distorted definitions and concepts that together create a new reality. Its main advantage being to provide room for new hypotheses and innovative ways of thinking. Which has its benefits. A case in point, according to Struett, the term behavior, which he considers inappropriate for plants. Because plants don't behave. That's probably a true statement, as I'm looking over at Zan, who is really frustrating me lately because Zan, who is an aloe, is not growing how I expected at all and is doing whatever the heck Zan wants to do, and I don't understand you. I just don't. Which he considers inappropriate for plants. Importantly, whereas the idea of plant behavior has faced skepticism in the past, behavior can be defined in ways that include plants. The internally coordinated responses, actions or inactions of whole living organisms, individuals or groups, to internal and or external stimuli, including responses, more easily understood as developmental changes. This definition of behavior, which avoids referencing movement, does not exclude plants or sessile organisms. On the contrary, the crucial aspect is the internal coordination and control of actions by the organism, irrespective of any locomotion. This said, we wonder why extending the notion of behavior beyond mere locomotion is a pseudo-scientific move. The reasoning behind this charge is not apparent. We think the generalization is justified and potentially fruitful for comparative psychology. Thinking of locomotion as one type of behavior and putting the stress on the capacity of organisms to control their responses to environmental conditions can raise scientifically productive questions concerning, for example, the multiple realizability of the same function stressed by so many of the counterparts on key. And this is another thing that happens in many of the zoocentric approaches, right? Is that there is this massive focus on locomotion intended to be the action that we see from other kinds of beings, especially in the animal world. And it's not the kind of plants are definitely moving. They definitely have movement. And this movement, as seen in things like how a plant changes or moves towards a sun or towards a light source or towards the darkness in the case of scototropism, is definitely an example of locomotion. But it's not the same type of locomotion as you would expect from an animal that has a very quick reflexive motion. Another conceptual dispute is highlighted by Correia Caeiro and Liebel, who argue that to claim that plants communicate with other plants when releasing volatile organic compounds, we should be able to demonstrate that plants releasing VOX intended to inform other plants. Now, VOX, volatile organic compounds, are the different kinds of aerosol and aerial type of compounds that plants put out, terpenes and all kinds of other things. Now, these have been purported to mean many different to have many different functions. Some functions they are saying is to warn other plants, to inform other plants of their presence or of the presence of other kinds of like invaders or pollinators, to call on pollinators and invite pollinators to come in. There's lots of reasons why volatile organic compounds put out. So in that paper, Correa and Caero talked about the fact that, or CCNL, talked about the fact of whether or not you can actually state with any kind of certainty that when a plant releases a volatile organic compound, it really has a function that is intended by the plant. For example, when a plant is being attacked by some kind of predator, and there is many more of that maybe same species of plant down in that area, the plant will put out a volatile organic compound that says to the others, hey, by the way, I'm being attacked. Here is who is attacking me. Go protect yourself, right? Because of course it takes plants a while to start to protect themselves. But they're challenging whether or not that is an intentional, a volition. In other words, the plant is literally saying to warn others while I'm getting eaten. So I'm dealing with my stuff and I'm warning others at the same time. At some point, people just have to, anyways, I'm not going to go there. In fairness, CCNL remain open to the investigation of purported plant communication. They're one of the ones in the middle category of, it doesn't really show it right now, but I'm not against it. Regardless of communication. As CCNL point out, to infer first order intentionality, which is, I do this on purpose, SONC would need evidence that plants have control over the production of VOX. How could you not think that they have control over anyway? And are releasing them with a communicative goal. Do plants show any of the evidence of intentionality? For example, do plants release more VOX close proximity, i.e. do they show audience effects? Does VOX production change if there is wind in the direction opposite to the intended receiver plants, i.e. sensitivity to social partner ability to receive signals? This tilts against their conclusion. Plants seem to have zero order intentionality, which excludes communication. In other words, we can't prove by the measures that we technically use that there is intention and therefore there is no intention. We can't read intention because we don't know how to read plant minds. We do. You and I. We know how to do it. I like this. Michelle puts in the chat, how dare birds not should be like everybody else. Isn't that? It would show a lot. It should be beautiful. And every kind of being all looked the same and acted the same. That way we can measure them the same. We acknowledge the challenges in this area and accept CCNL's viewpoint. The emerging field of plant bioacoustics suggests that sounds emitted by plants may play a role in regulating plant ecosystem interactions to some extent. However, this field is still in its infancy. As it continues to expand, the majority of the findings have yet to be independently replicated. Many questions remain open and unanswered at the time of this writing. Well, I believe the plants actually can control wind direction. I am convinced of it, that they can. And, they just know how to like whip it into the wind exactly in the right moment to get it in any direction, even if it seems contrary to the way the wind is moving right now. I really do believe that. At this stage, we do indeed have more questions than answers. For this reason, we're grateful for CCNL for highlighting these critical issues. What we currently understand is that certain stressors, such as drought, cutting, or viral infections may trigger the release of ultrasonic sounds that carry information. I'm still not sure why they transitioned here to bioacoustics instead of saying in the volatile organic compounds, especially because there is a fair amount of literature around VOX. I don't know. I think this is a strange thing that I wasn't able to follow when I read through the paper last week, because this is a piece that I read through, but I guess we'll find out. The emerging insights into plant bioacoustics suggest that some sounds could play a role in initiating defensive strategies. Other research, I guess maybe because they're just showing intentionality, and this is a different way and an easier way maybe of understanding intentionality than the VOX argument. Could be. Other research is exploring the concept of directional and phonotropic responses, reactions to sounds that carry significant ecological value, such as the sound of water. And it was interesting because one of the papers Connolly negated this whole idea of the water piece, but there is a fair amount of research that plants can hear the water and that's what they're growing towards, not the sense of like feeling the moisture or any of those pieces. Buzz pollination represents yet another burgeoning area of study. It is evident that many sounds produced by plants, such as those resulting from cavitation, the formation of air bubbles in the xylem that emit noise as they move through or burst within vascular tissues, are involuntary. However, there is also speculation that plants may emit sounds for communicative purposes, such as the acoustic inhibition of non-kin plant growth. At this juncture, caution is imperative. We agree that many questions about plant sounds remain to be explored, but a body of evidence is gradually accumulating in support of these theories. Numerous urgent inquiries persist, from the ecological significance of plant sounds to the mechanisms responsible for producing these purported voluntary emissions. Is sound a medium for bidirectional interaction among plants? The answer remains elusive. The distinction between involuntary and voluntary sound emissions can be linked to observations made by Mastinu, who notes that, I always love doing these little direct quotes. The plant is not conscious of emitting molecules. When we approach an automatic door, it opens. We communicate to the door to open. It opens with an automatic response. Mancuso, always citing my beautiful professor, and colleagues have observed that radical tips can orient their growth to specific sound vibrations that can be traced to water. Sound waves. They were doing this testing when I was there. The last time I was in the lab, Mancuso's lab, that's one of the areas we were having a conversation with the researchers about this particular study. They were trying to narrow it down even further and trying it with like small pieces of root. It was really an interesting discussion. They were struggling though, I have to admit, but I think it's just because their test setup was very odd. Sound waves, not soil moisture, determine the orientation of the root towards the source of the sound. Again, is this a matter of cognition or perhaps an automated response? I want to check that 2020 article. Anyway, it is indeed conceivable that plants' responses are not fundamentally more complex than an automatic door, where a sensor activates a mechanism to automate, open, or close the door. In fact, Adams has made this comparison before to suggest that plant behaviors are informationally driven but not cognitive. However, using the automatic door as an analogy may oversimplify the actions of plants by comparing them to rudimentary reactions. Unlike garage doors, which react to a single cue, plant interactions with their environment are almost never triggered by isolated signals. As we have discussed elsewhere, plants respond not only to magnitudes and directions of environmental variables, but also to the temporal dimensions, as well as the relations they have to other variables. And I think that this is one of the major challenges of all of this plant work and this research, is that the current, and maybe this is part of the reason why this is becoming such a big issue right now, is that, issue is not the right word, maybe because why is this coming to the forefront, is mechanistic science, the division of everything, the breaking everything down to its smallest little component and thinking that can help us understand it, has only gotten us so far. Plants, I don't think we're going to be able to understand in that way. It's just, they're beings that have way too many complex relationships. That's the whole point. And so I think that this is pushing our scientific mind to stretch and expand and think beyond the idea of, simple kind of, what's the right word I'm looking for? Simply trying to isolate everything down to one teeny tiny component. And I think that this is going to be a really interesting shift from the way that we think to the way that society kind of looks at these matters. Sorry. This we hold as anything but unsophisticated garage door behavior. Finally, we would like to comment on Mallet et al.'s emphasis on the pivotal role that the principle of parsimony has in guiding our scientific inquiries. We agree that parsimony is useful when selecting between competing theories or paradigms. Yet, it stands alongside other values such as empirical accuracy, consistency, broad scope, and fruitfulness. Although there are instances where we might lean towards simpler theory, the simplest theory is not always the true one. Opting for a particular paradigm encompasses a multifaceted interplay of these values, historical context, and the subjective judgments of the scientific community. The annals of science offer numerous examples to ponder, but we need not din our philosophy of science hat at this juncture. Dissection out, observation in. And not only that, observation on multiple layers. Michelle, I think that this is a really interesting perspective, is that dissection can help give us some context. But even in dissection, it's not like I just dissect one organ and I think I understand how the body works. It's about combination of dissection and organism, although I'd prefer a little less dissection altogether. But then observation of, okay, I'm going to observe it from this angle, and I'm going to observe it from this angle, and I'm going to observe it from this lens, and I'm going to use this lens because I'm going to observe what happens when I put this other being with them, and I'm going to observe what happens when I do this, and what happens when I use soil, and what happens when I use water, and what happens when the air. There's so many variables, so many more variables that are interacting in a plant's life, because a plant just lives a much more interconnected life, which, hey, we need a little bit more of altogether. So I think it's perfect. I think it's perfect. Instead, to briefly divert our attention to more trivial matters, we hope the editor-in-chief overseeing these exchanges, Harnard, will permit us, despite not being native English speakers, to point out a lexical oversight in Mallet et al.'s commentary. By the way, I believe Lincoln Ties, and I believe a lot of the Mallet et al. Are English, like English isn't British. So I think that's part of, and where Miguel Segundo-Ortin and Paco Calvo are Spanish, like literally Spain Spanish. So I think that's why. The term imparsimony does not exist in the English language, or at least it is not found in standard dictionaries. Given that our commentators have dedicated significant attention to dictionary definitions, we trust they'll take this observation in jest as we near the midpoint of the response. Now, back to the core discussion. They just had to put in a dig, just a little bit of shade, just a little bit of like poke, like poke the bear, and let's just see what happens. It's a little bit of FAFO, like let's just see what happens. I wish there was another reply to this reply, which is a reply to a reply, and I'm just dying to see what they're thinking. In their section titled Imparsimony, Mallet et al. Contend that, assuming that sentience is a highly complex phenomenon arising from complex physical processes, we reason that if a behavior can be explained more simply by knowing physiological or biochemical processes, then that behavior does not rely on sentience. In other words, if we can give it another reason, whatever the reason is, and we think that that reason's easier to get to, that's what you should accept. Simplest explanations are preferred. That is the parsimony principle that guides scientific inquiry. The proponents of plant sentience fail to apply it. We must admit that we're somewhat perplexed. Are Mallet et al. Suggesting that as soon as human physiological and biochemical processes are completely understood, human behavior will no longer depend on sentience? Does this mean that as we gain more scientific insight into the physiological, biochemical foundations of human behavior, there will be less justification for recognizing human-level sentience? We find that hard to believe, and naturally we presume at Mallet et al. Do not intend to suggest such a corollary. However, if that's the case, their argument remains elusive to us. Emphasis added totally by me. I love this. I love that they have, after so many different papers, gotten to the place, especially because they've been arguing with these folks for so long. I am ecstatic that they're finally poking back. They're not only poking, they're shoving. They're like saying, dude, at what point? I was watching today. You might know that I have this slight obsession with watching United States trials on YouTube. I love the law. I'm fascinated by the law. I love the application of the law. I probably should have been an attorney. And there's still time in my life. Who knows? I might. But I love litigation because I love the thinking process of how everything works and understanding rules and knowing when to consciously break them and how to work with them and all these types of things. I love it. Anyway, one of the lawyers was kind of having a little having it out. He's a defense attorney, and he was kind of having it out with the attorney for the state, who was made a comment about something, and he kind of, you could tell what he really wanted to say was, fuck around and find out, dude. But basically what he was like saying, he's like, so, the state's attorney is claiming that the way that they're going to challenge us, or kind of, is by saying, is by putting up so-and-so on the stand. Do it. I personally would love the opportunity to cross-examine that. So please do that. Like, you want to go against our expert by putting up one of your guys, that particular guy who is a guy that's in a lot of trouble. And he's like, I would love it. Do it. And I think that that's what Paco and Miguel are doing here. They're basically saying to Mallet and Ties and everything, and they're like, you guys keep digging yourselves a hole, because the more we let you talk, and I'm going to keep instigating you and poking you to continue to talk, because the more that you talk, like, the more you make yourself sound like an imbecile. Like, sorry, my words, only my words. But that's what it feels like. It feels like they're just saying, you are saying such ridiculous things, because in order, and as a Taurus with a stubborn streak, I have been known to do this much more in the past. I do it much less now, which is, you so want to win your argument that you start digging your heels in so deep that you start saying things that are ridiculous. And I think that's where Ties and Mallet and this whole group of folks have gotten. Like, seriously, you're starting to say ridiculous things. So I like this, that it's like, do you intend to suggest that the more that we understand the biology of how thoughts work and the biological principles around behavior and cognition and all these elements, which is an argument I have been making for the longest time, the fact that they so easily dissect plants, which means, rather than, as Michelle had said in the comments, she said, dissection out, observation in. If you started first with observation, you would be in awe and wonder and, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And then when you learn the biological, you'd be even more in awe and wonder that the biology is like, oh, well, my goodness, the way that they do this thing is by doing this, right? But because for plants, which is different from human beings, it's done on the opposite scale, because it's so easy to cut, rip, dissect, shred, kill plants. It means that the approach is always dissect first, see how the mechanism is, and then who cares why they do it. And so therefore, of course, you're not going to get to sentience, because you already are treating this plant like an object. And I had this, I'm on a soapbox, give me a second. I had this conversation last year when I went to a conference in Padova, where James Cahill, who is a researcher out of the University of Alberta, I think it's Alberta, in Canada for sure, and I'm almost positive it's Alberta, but I might be wrong. Anyways, Cahill, who is to a certain extent a proponent of plant intelligence and such, but I asked the question, which is, because the way that he was setting up his experiment to me was, look how interesting plants are. Now let me break them down even more. And it's like, are you worried, which I still think that all of them in the back of their heads are worried, that the more you come to sentience, the more we will come to realize that this willy-nilly way of using, dissecting, and killing plants and growing them however the hell we want, and like propagating seeds just to kill those seeds over and over and over again, isn't going to be good anymore. We can't keep doing that. Just the same as we don't do it for certain kinds of animals. We still do it for way too many animals in such a willy-nilly way. But I digress. I'm not even going to go down that path right now. I think it's for both. And he was like, I am not trying to get to a place where I can stop dissecting plants. Like, he was really honest. He was like, I marvel at plants. I think plants are super intelligent and I love what they do, but I don't have any intention to stop. I mean, he didn't say it in these words, but it was I don't have any intentions to have them stop looking like, for them to stop being somewhat objects that I can test. I can marvel at the way that they're objects. I can marvel at the fact that these objects respond in such ways, but I'm still going to do whatever the hell I want to do in order to research them. And I still think that that's the crux of a lot of these arguments. A lot of these arguments, in my opinion, are a defensive way that many of these other researchers do not want to accept, that they would have to change fundamentally the way that they do research if they started with observation that then to biology, but the biology then had to be careful because you are talking about a sentient being. That's my opinion, and just my opinion. So, moving on to number 7. Neurophysiological lack of evidence. On neurophysiological lack of evidence, we explore the discussions about the lack of a central nervous system in plants. Oh my goodness. I am so sick of this argument. I really am. I have to admit, I don't know how researchers do it. Like, I am sick of this argument. I'm so sick of it because it's not necessarily rooted in, we haven't found, it's more of, because there's no biology, this biology is not there, we don't believe that this is even possible. Meh. And its implications for plant sentience. In doing so, we address the comparisons made between plant signaling systems and animal neural structures. In section 3 of our target article, we reviewed electrophysiological processes that might underpin, if only in part, plant cognition and sentience. We end that section with general remarks about the implications of our findings. As we noted, while it may be premature to attribute sentience to plants, given the lack of consensus on the required biological features, if you try to wait for the consensus by the other side, you're going to be screwed. Dismissing plant sentience solely because plants lack a central brain or neurons is based on assumptions and begs the very question we are trying to address. Exactly. Yet several commentators continue to focus on the functionality of the functional neurobiology of consciousness and the absence of a central nervous system in plants. It's an old argument. It doesn't make any sense. Move on. Move on. Broom contends that plants lack a central nervous system, and I don't even think it's really, I mean, just because you have a central nervous system, in my opinion, doesn't even mean you're central. I am stopping. I don't know what happens with the recording because my connection is unstable. All right, I think I'm back, but if I'm back, please let me know. Can somebody in the chat let me know if you can see me, if you see me talking and moving and discussing and, all the things that happens during a live stream. And, while you're there in your message, can you hit the like button and subscribe and, the little notification bell. YouTube really likes when you hit the little notification bell. So please, yay. Okay, so I'm seeing a message come through. That means that I'm probably back online. Sorry. Broom. You didn't miss anything. I stopped talking. Broom contends that plants lack a central nervous system, which is a prerequisite for sentience. I wish it was a prerequisite. I don't know. Anyway. He further elaborates in his commentary, referencing a previous publication of his. I know, he cites himself, where I think the emphasis should be on the he, not on the defines. I think it should be on the he. He defines for himself a feeling as a brain construct so feeling is a brain construct involving at least perceptual awareness, which is associated with a life-regulating system, is recognizable by the individual when it recurs and may change behavior or act as a reinforcer in learning. Exactly, right? Animals have nerve nets. They don't all have nervous system, but they'll just say that that's close enough. That's the problem, Michelle. They'll say that is the closest that it's close enough. But plants don't have any of that, so that doesn't count at all. We think that to define feelings according to a brain construct is to beg the question. We suggest simply removing the word brain and defining a feeling as a construct, period. I like that in a paper they literally wrote the word period. But Broom insists, oh my goodness, I remember this paper. Broom just insists on, and it's almost the entire paper is Broom referencing Broom. A nervous system with some degree of brain development is required in order to have an experience. So I can only have an experience in which I have brain. I am also happy that there is a lot more research going into people who are born either with brain, where the brain is not fully formed in the way that we would expect, or who've had massive brain injuries and who have so much consciousness. So it's like, really, is the brain really necessary? Is the brain really necessary? Are we sure about that? Of greater concern, Broom notes that there are many parallels between plant and animal cells, but insists that none of the examples advanced in our target article indicate that there is a nervous system in any plant. Such claims are perplexing, as we were clear that plants do not have a nervous system. I publish, therefore I am. That's a beautiful comment. Beautiful comment, Herbie. Beautiful comment. We did note, however, that the reported similarities between the nervous system of animals and the non-neural vascular system of higher plants, which I evaluated an entire paper on this subject, which you can find in the older plant consciousness commentary. It's great. Have motivated some researchers to broaden the definition of a nervous system. Note, in addition, that this line of inquiry is in the interest of making functional comparisons between physiological structures and of promoting a better understanding of how evolution has driven the features of signal generation, transmission, and processing in multicellular beings. This functional angle, we suggest, may be the source of the misunderstanding and MTNL's opposition to the term plant neurobiology. To be clear, we are not very interested in terminological disputes. We think these disputes may obscure the many molecular level similarities found between animal and plant signaling systems. Signaling, in other words, systems that the plants use to signal. And the possibilities that these similarities may underpin the same cognitive functions we appreciate at the level of the organism. Doliega, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it because I always forget the L with the little thing through it, is usually Polish, or maybe Hungarian, Polish, that has that, and I don't remember how it's pronounced. So I apologize. I'm going to say Doliega. Shift the focus from the purported necessity of a nervous system and suggest that demonstrating plant sentience would require that we identify not only behaviors analogous to those exhibited by but also the functional analogies of the mechanisms causing such behaviors. The same claim is advanced by Carlos Diamante, who insists that we see clear functional analogies between the internal signaling system of plants and animals. Why? Why do they have to be the same? Why? Couldn't they be completely different? They evolved through different lines. Why? We wholeheartedly concur with this suggestion. I am not. They shouldn't be the same. I guess maybe analogies, they're just saying it doesn't have to be the same mechanism, but it has to have similar behavior. It's not locomotion characteristics. Indeed, this is why our target article's title includes a question mark and why we insist on the need to promote the scientific inquiry on the topic. A number of commentaries take a sympathetic approach to our views. Pessoa welcomes our call for a rigorous science of plant behavior and physiology, advancing a distinction between anatomical and functional centralization, the latter not needing to be implemented in terms of the former. Pessoa writes that, with processing through interactions of many spatially distributed areas rather than a master controller, Pessoa goes on to write that certain forms of functional centralization might still be important, as exemplified by the integrated way in which compact bodies move around. We agree that with the hierarchical approach endorsed by Pessoa, as we observed in the target article and reiterate here, Bechtel and co-authors have argued that many decisions in nature, including some performed by mammals and human beings, are controlled by hierarchically distributed mechanisms. These mechanisms act as control systems which make local decisions based on particular information parameters, allowing organisms to stay alive in complex environments. Surely, plants use control systems to measure and assess environmental factors based on survival standards too. Controls that are not top-down but can operate independently without a central boss. We don't need no stinking boss. We don't need no central boss. No boss. No boss. No boss. No, I am my own boss. I am my own boss here. I am my own boss there. I am my own boss over here. I am my own boss over there. I is boss. Boss. Sorry. Just got carried away. Rather than an oversimplification of the ways plants or bacteria, the preferred example, make their choices, non-hierarchic centralized executive mechanisms serve to emphasize specific widespread control systems that still gauge and interpret environmental cues in a flexible manner. In line with the aforementioned remarks, we agree with Rouleau 11 when they claim, based on the concepts of multiple realizability and substrate independence, that if different organizations of nervous tissue can achieve the same functions, the possibility that cognitive capacities, including sentience, can be achieved by other tissues should be considered. These concepts clearly apply to hierarchically and heterarchically structured control systems, as RNL observed. It is highly implausible that all sentient life in the universe achieves states using the neural circuitry underlying human consciousness on Earth. By the way, should that Earth have been capital E? I'm always questioning this. I see that people put a capital E, but isn't that on Earth as in the name, like on Mars? And Mars would always be capitalized. Why isn't Earth capitalized? It's a question. Question to whomever wants to answer it. If you want to answer it in the chat, I appreciate it. Okay, so plant sentience is likely to be the tip of the iceberg of sentient systems yet unknown. I completely stand behind this statement. Completely. Robinson et al. Further discussed the comparison between the plant vascular system and the animal nervous system. Their position starkly contrasts with that of RNL. For instance, Robinson et al. Write that many of the neurobiological properties we claim to be shared by animals and plants demand clarification, if not refutation. Specifically, they refer to 1, plant neurotransmitters. God, they love to argue about plant neurotransmitters and anesthetics. And 2, signaling in plants and its purported resemblance to neural transmissions. In what follows, we will try to clarify our position on both fronts. Hopefully, they'll make it easy. Regarding Robinson et al., turn to Wikipedia for a definition of neurotransmitter. I don't know if you don't accept the Oxford English Dictionary for a definition. Is the definition in Wikipedia better? It's a question. It's a question I have. I don't know. Wikipedia seems to me like it would be even a little less reliable than the Oxford English Dictionary. But I could be wrong. This definition stresses the necessity of a neuron secreting a signaling molecule to affect another cell across a synapse. They claim that the most common neurotransmitters are glutamate and, I'm just going to call it GABA, and acetylcholine. I got that one. Acetylcholine, hopefully. And that the former two do act as signaling molecules for plants, which we knew. This is part of this ongoing argument because glutamate and GABA both behave in plants or are used by plants in a much similar way that they're used in animal counterparts. I think they're all being shady. I'm agreeing with it. This is all being shady. However, based on their preferred definitions, they conclude that they do not fit the definition of neurotransmitters because plants lack synapses. So the neurotransmitter gets downgraded to just a transmitter without a synapse. But it's a neurotransmitter over here, but the exact same compound is not a neurotransmitter over there. See what I mean about the goalpost just continuously being moved? Like, let's move it over here, and then let's move it over there, and then let's move it over there, and then let's get it out of here over here. Like, seriously, folks, seriously. As we see it, placing unwavering trust in Wikipedia or even dictionary definitions is a risky venture. Takes, for instance, the Oxford Dictionary's definition of action potential. The change in voltage that occurs across the membrane of a nerve or muscle cell when a nerve impulse is triggered. Of course, the definition from Encyclopedia Britannica, I love that they're opening up all these different definitions. We've got Wikipedia, we've got the Oxford English Dictionary, we've got the Encyclopedia Britannica. The brief, about 1,000th of a second, reversal of electric polarization of the membrane of a nerve cell, neuron, or muscle cell. Given these descriptions, should we deduce that action potentials do not occur in plants simply because these definitions do not accommodate the type of action potentials generated by cells other than neurons or muscles? Clearly not. Just so you know, the reason he's saying this is because action potentials is not a term, which is an action potential is the electrical impulse. It's that kickoff impulse, as well, you've read the definitions now for multiple things. So, but it's not really in dispute that plants have action potentials. So they don't have neurotransmitters, but they have action potentials and also variable potentials. Like there's different potentials. Electrical propagation in plants entails direct cellular connections through plasmodesmata and conductive vascular bundles of fibers. This is the reason why the vascular system, I'm getting all excited. And so then my words get all in my mouth. So the vascular system is being compared to the central nervous system because of this. This direct coupling obviates the need for synapses because through the plasmodesmata and conductive, like these bundles, you don't need the same kind of mechanism that you have in animals. Plus, that's what's used in tissue and to create an entire different physiology. And that's the reason why humans and animals have that. There is no revelation to Robinson et al. They're undoubtedly aware, more so than we are, that plant cells can also produce action potentials. So, what's the takeaway regarding dictionary definitions, especially when some are seemingly biased towards synapse-centric discussions? Either we treat these definitions with the reverence they command, or we do not, but consistency is the key. You can't just use the Oxford English Dictionary when it's convenient for you and switch over to the Encyclopedia Britannica when you don't like what the OED is actually showing you. Okay? That's the way it is. By the way, giving away my Oxford English Dictionary was probably one of the stupidest and saddest things I ever did. I loved my Oxford English Dictionary. And then one day I just gave it away because it was so heavy. I didn't think I could actually bring it to Italy. And now I'm kicking myself because it was the cool one that has like the little magnifying glass because there's so many. It's the compact version. It's 2 volumes. And there are just so many words in it that you need a magnifying glass to read. And it comes with a little magnifying glass. Super cool. The crux of the matter is that specific compounds recognized as neurotransmitters and neuromodulators in animals also contribute to electrical signaling in plants. This holds especially for substances like GABA and glutamate. In plants, these compounds disperse in ways reminiscent of the diffusion patterns of neuromodulators in animal systems. As underscored by Miguel Toné and Guinness, citing Toyota et al., glutamate's presence can catalyze a surge in calcium ion concentrations, facilitating electrical signal transmission in plants, particularly post-injury. Current plant research is thinking GABA, viewing it not just as a metabolic offshoot, but also as a pivotal signaling compound. The multifunctionality of these molecules and processes from growth to stress responses sheds light on evolutionary progression of neurotransmitters. Researchers contend that GABA signaling pathways might be an evolutionary staple. Now, this is something that has existed and then evolved into having other capabilities, while others ponder the ubiquity of glutamate receptors, hinting at potential evolutionary links between foundational metabolism and cellular communication in multicellular entities. With regard to anesthetics, Robinson et al. Wonder whether the way volatile anesthetics affect plants indicates plant sentience. Yes. The reason that the similarities are too sparse to support the hypothesis that plants are sentient organisms merely because they lose responsiveness under anesthesia. It's not enough, folks. It's never enough. If it's a plant, it's never going to be enough. As explained elsewhere, the exploration of anesthesia in plants provides potentially vital insights into the primary effects of anesthetics across various species. The successful application of anesthesia to plants demonstrates the universal significance of electrical signaling principles and their interruption across diverse biological realms. One conceivable theory suggests that, as in animals, anesthesia hinders the transmission of action potentials. Anesthesia affects GABA and glutamate, both crucial for the generation of action potentials. The profound capability of anesthetics to halt motor responses in animals, plants, and protists has been noted. Balushka and Mancuso love to talk about this subject. With the responsiveness of anesthetics probably evolving in unicellular organisms as an adaptation to boundary membrane homeostasis and ion channels activities to changing environmental conditions. This perspective hints at the potential existence of anesthetic-like compounds in plants, with ethylene being a notable example. Further research into these plant-derived anesthetic and analogs is certainly merited, but as noted in Lee and Calvo, when we separate anesthetics mechanisms from neural pathways, similarities become evident across various organisms. Such a spectrum encompasses entities from paramecium to primate. The ramifications of this are significant, going beyond mere ion channel operations and the impact of anesthesia on mitochondria and the cytoskeleton. Studies on the influence of anesthetics on both flora and fauna, we suggest, may hint at a broader underlying principle. So now let's turn to Robinson et al.'s second point. Signaling in plants and its alleged similarity to neural transmissions. Here, they address both action potentials and slow wave potentials. We begin by considering action potentials, especially since we've been talking about action potentials, so it makes it a little bit easier to. Have they tried anesthesia on rocks? Hold on, I'm going to think about this question. Or fungus, or have they tried, I don't know, removing a leaf and then trying anesthesia? They have done the anesthesia across in plants in numerous different ways. I don't know if they've tried just the leaf, but I do know from what I read, from what I remember reading of that study, that there was a few different ways. On a rock, I don't know what behavior you would be able to see in order to determine. I don't know what kind of signaling rocks might use, but fungus would be an interesting one. Robinson et al. Contend that there is no electrochemical equivalency between plants and animals. In support of their claim, they consider the fact that the electrochemical origin of action potentials in nerves is completely different from that in plants, involving CA2 influx rather than Na plus influx, and that the propagation of plant APs is 100 and 1,000 times slower. And unlike neuronal action potentials, is associated with waves of elevated systolic calcium. I'm thinking, I'm trying to understand that. I'm trying to break it down from my head. In insisting on the lack of an electrochemical equivalency, we run the risk of overlooking possible functional equivalences. And this is the real point. Of course, these equivalences need to be found empirically and in the case of plant sentience, but it is good to have possibilities that sentience is multiply realizable, as R&L note, which is what I was saying earlier, that I don't think that this single mechanistic approach is really going to work for plants. We do acknowledge that numerous distinctions exist between plant and neural APs, Lee and Calvo delineate 5 primary differences grouped into 2 categories. Hold on a second, I need tea. And preferably not spill it on myself. Okay, here's our number. Variations in molecular compounds and variations in electrical and signaling properties within and between cells. Specifically, the differences in compounds. We are getting into some of the technical stuff. Hang in there. If you are not a technical person and you do not understand this biology, just hold on for a second. We will get out of the biology in the sense of we will get the greater picture of what the biology means in a second, okay? I will be right there with you. Give me 1 second, okay? Specifically, the differences encompasses 1, the molecular components responsible for depolarization, because this is necessary for the transition across the whatever compound synapses, or whether we're talking about vascular structures, vascular fibers, doesn't matter. 2, the dynamics of the falling phase and the hyperpolarization and differences in the electrical signaling properties within and between cells, such as 3, the average resting potential of plant cell membranes compared to that of neuronal cells. 4, the rate of propagation, where in the relative slowness of plant action potentials, propagation is probably due to the characteristics of the phloem. These characteristics include a higher activation threshold for chloride channels, a sparser density of ion channels, differences in inherent activation kinetics, the necessity for signals to cross cell-to-cell junctions, and the lack of myelination as observed in nerves, and varied durations of the refractory period. Look, despite the differences, the essential functional characteristics action potentials from other electrical potentials remain intact, as underscored by Lee and Calvo, which was a paper that I think we did, or have we not done it yet? Go look, because it's from around the same period of this paper. Plant APs are induced by voltage depolarization, follow an all or nothing principle, possess a threshold potential, and travel at constant velocity and amplitude. They also follow the threefold structure of neuronal APs. Moreover, plant APs exhibit absolute and relative refractory periods post-firing. And here we're going to get out of the weeds. We're going to get out of the weeds. To cut a long story short, plant and animal action potentials are functionally similar in that they both serve as rapid, reliable means of electrical signal transmission. They follow similar patterns of initiation, propagation, and termination. Let's start, let's move, let's stop. Ensuring effective communication and response to stimuli. The question, as Sidney Diamante and Dolega et al. Rightly point out, is whether these functional similarities are relevant to sentience. This is the part of the research we want to pursue. We also understand that beyond observing similarities in action potentials across plants and other organisms and utilizing plants as study subjects, it's crucial to acknowledge their distinct features. Plants uniquely employ action potentials for communication between subterranean and surface structures and for interactions with other plants and fungi. And there's your question on the fungi, Michelle. I am sure that somebody's probably tried to anesthetize fungi. Somebody. In the realm of plant electrophysiology, there are unique electric potential types, including local electrical potentials, variational or slow wave potentials, and system potentials. LEPs, which is local electrical potentials, although generated locally, are integral to plant physiology. SWPs, which is the potentials activated by damage, traverse the plant but differ notably from APs. They produce varying signal magnitudes, deviating from all or none principle, move at reduced speeds and regulated by fluid, and are transmitted through the xylem. Interestingly, SWPs seem to trigger APs. Meanwhile, SPs are extensive hyperpolarization events, the opposition of depolarization, that can, for example, travel from one leaf to another. To grasp the essence of plant APs, it is imperative to view them in the context of a more intricate and unique electrical signaling framework. If you can be rendered unconscious, so that reminds me. So the other day I was talking to this super cool artist. Michelle, I'm so glad that you said this. I was talking to this super cool artist who's working with plants obviously in his art. And he made a comment that I have to go find my notes somewhere because I'm almost positive I wrote it down or have to find it. But apparently there's a quote by somebody famous who obviously has some clout. And of course, I'm going to butcher this completely. But basically, the quote was and this was something because he's again working on how do I bring people into the conscious mind of plants or to the sentience of plants through using the arts. And he made a comment that was along the lines of like, we'll use the word being, any being that can lie is inherently conscious. Like, in other words, the ability for you to lie already implies consciousness. Which got me, as soon as he said it, he was talking to me about something. And in that, he was making the comment of like, that whomever that quote is to, that if you can lie, then that means you're conscious. Like there's a consciousness of guilt if I can lie. And I was like sitting there going, oh my goodness, this is another angle that we haven't touched on for all of this plant sentience perspective, because it is widely accepted that plants lie. Plants. Sorry, I'm laughing because Michelle said, I don't know, because does that mean that politicians are conscious? They're conscious that they're lying. That doesn't mean they're conscious that they're lying. Let's just there. But the point being is, this is another angle that I do not think has been approached in the entire plant discussion, because it is widely accepted that plants participate in deceptive practices, that they create deceptive displays of their colors, of their shapes, of their compounds in order to deceive other beings, usually pollinators, partners, all kinds of things like that. Which would imply then that if they are practicing these deceptive principles, they are conscious. So I have to find that quote. I have to figure out who said it. I have to ask that person that I was talking to, because yes, this is a good way of looking at it. I want to try. I want to go down this rabbit hole. This is a rabbit hole. Okay. Robinson et al. Devote an extensive subsection to slow wave potentials and wounding, following their brief discourse, none of these are very long, so following their brief discourse on action potentials. We generally appreciate their informative overview of slow wave potentials and have attentively considered the details. Robinson et al. Conclude that wound-induced signaling in plants is therefore a complex form of electrical communication unique to plants, and that this is in no way comparable to the transmission of electrical signals in neurons. We agree. However, our stance never relied on equating plant wound-induced electrical signaling with neuronal electric signals. Consider, too, the insights offered by his commentary encourages us to take a step back and broaden our perspective, transitioning from the intricacies of electrical potentials to the topologies of biological networks. In particular, it considers two crucial features of solid brains. One, intermediate elements that allow information processing beyond the sensor effect metaphor. And two, reentrant loops might be a critical requirement for sentient. Soleil then poses the question whether there is something in plants that we can map onto any of these topological features in his view. In plants, the dynamics are limited to single leaves with no interaction beyond this scale. We appreciate Soleil's thoughtful contributions. Indeed, the concept of reentrant structures in plants has been broached, albeit largely as a theoretical proposition. It has been posited that anastomosis and plasmodesmata might serve as foundational elements within the network of vascular cells, enabling the creation of intricate topologies and potentially establishing the reentrant dynamic core. We cannot understand, however, why Soleil affirms that the dynamics are limited to single leaves with no integration beyond this scale. An extensive literature highlights that many ways plants integrate information systemically beyond the scale of a single leaf. There's Cahill. There's a citation for Cahill that I was talking about earlier. Soleil might accordingly rethink his stance with respect to the position of plants in the cognitive space. And here comes the shade again. Like, you might consider that you're wrong. Just consider it. Consider it. 8. Markers of sentience. To set the stage for our exploration of potential markers or indicators of sentience, as suggested in the animal literature, it is useful to first address certain preliminary criticisms. I have a feeling this could be more doubling down and shade, but let's just see. Gudfrund argues that rather than scientific questions, why is there a comma there? I think that's just a mistake. Argues that, comma, rather than scientific, comma, questions about sentience are cultural, comma, and therefore the scientific quest for sentience is doomed, regardless of whether the focus of our research is plants or animals. The reasoning behind Gudfrund's, I think, view is that the scientific method is limited and agnostic about the question of the distribution of consciousness in any system, including plants and animals. I don't remember if he included humans in that. He might have. I remember this, but I don't remember the paper well enough. Gudfrund's G's, we're just going to call him G's for now. G opens his commentary with an alleged case of a reductio ad absurdum by the integrated information theory. Oh, I remember this paper now. A controversial theory of consciousness. All theories of consciousness are controversial. Moving all the way from this alleged instance of an RAA, or reductio ad absurdum. Does that mean it's absurd? And we're going to get into the shade. Moving all the way from this alleged instance of RAA to our target article, G writes, not only does the target article fail to provide convincing evidence to support plant sentience, but it raises questions analogous to RAA about the validity of the ways we define and measure consciousness in other species. So not only did you tell us something ridiculous in trying to say that plants are sentient, but in fact, what your argument is showing is that the whole concept that anybody is sentient is ridiculous. So take that. You have now systematically made consciousness a ridiculous argument. We disagree with G on 2 counts. 1, the argument he considers to be RAA, or absurd and reductionary, is not. Point. It's just not. 2, his view on the divide between science and culture is ill-founded. Consider first his reductio of IIT. RAA is a form of argument where, starting from some premise or assumption, one shows that this assumption leads to an absurd conclusion. The goal is to demonstrate that the original assumption is untenable, and therefore that the opposite must be true. According to G, IIT is an example of RAA. And there, we're down with OPP, because you know me. Sorry. His claim is that the assumptions of the theory lead to the clearly ridiculous conclusion that the internet is conscious. I don't know, man. With all the articles that we're seeing about how AI might potentially be conscious, maybe the idea that the internet is conscious is not really so ridiculous after all. He then asserts that this conclusion serves as a refutation of ITT via RAA. Yeah, you know me. However, simply claiming that some conclusion is absurd is insufficient. One must demonstrate that the conclusion is absurd, showing, for example, that the statement is contradictory. Since we do not defend IIT in our target article, we do not need to spend more time with this issue. We just want to know that much more work is needed to refute IIT the way G aims to do. More interesting is G's approach to science and culture. There is no experiment or observation to distinguish who is right and who is wrong. We cannot even say who is more likely to be right. In this respect, the target article fails to move the debate over plant sentience from Romanticism to the realm of science. G places significant emphasis on a Popperian falsificationist methodology. I just want to say this again. Remember I told you I was saying earlier how I love watching like law stuff. There is this one attorney that I have been following in a case who is the master of the most intensely broad vocabulary I have ever heard, and it is beautiful. I mean, to hear somebody eloquently insert words that you expertly used to make you feel curious as to their definitions and like you can almost understand them and not make you feel stupid for not knowing them is masterful. It's just enough to say, I am an eloquent, intelligent, well-studied man that you should listen to the arguments that I'm making because I am using these big words, but not to make you feel small, but because they are the best suited words for the argument that I'm trying to make. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. I love it. I love him. And I look forward to hearing more of his litigation, of his way of citing the argument so clearly. Okay, so we're looking at the significant emphasis on a Popperian falsificationist methodology. You tell me if you understood what that meant. Popperian. And the epistemic value of parsimony. Like, just look at that whole phrase. Good. Now I have to say his name because the whole phrase requires it. Gunfreund, I'm assuming, places significant emphasis on a Popperian falsificationist methodology and the epistemic value of parsimony. English can be quite beautiful and hoity-toity. Yet his discourse suggests a somewhat reductive understanding of the complexities involved in applying the scientific method. Yeah, if I could think of, Michelle brings up a good point in the comments. She says, could you imagine this in their native tongue? Yes, that would be fucking fantastic when I think of Paco Calvo, because he would probably yes, he would definitely add a whole amount of shade in there, very subtly put, like just enough that you're like, are they making fun of me? That's how it would be. Where the whole thing you're reading it thinking, these guys are my friend. Wait a minute, are they my friends? The issue with sentience, G believes, is that the only reason we talk about it is that we feel it and it is important for us. Apart from our subjective feelings, consciousness is not part of scientific theory. Consciousness in scientific theories of behavior is neither parsimonious nor falsifiable. Scientists are expected to remove such unnecessary elements from their theories. It doesn't matter. You can't prove consciousness in anybody. Let it all go. Let it all go, folks. We find these comments concerning the explanation of observable phenomena in science rather perplexing. There's that shade with the perplexity. Take, for instance, black holes, electrons, or even dark matter. Surely the use of the term observable in relation to entities like subatomic particles demands some elucidation. In the commonplace understanding, directly perceiving something with our eyes, electrons have not been observed. Yet, in experimental physics, observation typically refers to detecting the impacts or traces of an entity rather than directly visualizing it. Electrons, though not directly observed, can be inferred through direct means. Observations of the electron typically involve gauging probabilities and interactions rather than seeing in a conventional sense. The existence of electrons gives rise to an inference to the best explanation, but not merely on the basis of adhering to Popperian methodologies. It is unclear to us why sentience should not be explored in a similar vein, even if it cannot be directly observed. After all, G seems certain that cognitive behaviors are observable, as he states that physical, chemical, biological, ecological, and evolutionary theories explain observable behaviors, cognitive and non-cognitive alike. So we have cognitive behaviors, we have non-cognitive behaviors, we have behaviors of every kind of physiology, but we can't understand consciousness from any of this. Hmm. Do you see why we still struggle? Like thousands of years we've been having these arguments, thousands. We struggle to comprehend why the debate on cognition, including plant cognition, is firmly within the realm of science, yet the discourse on sentience cannot possibly be. That was shady. That had a beautiful undertone that I think would have been even more emphasized with a question mark. I think it needed a question mark at the end. What do you think? I think a question mark was demanded there. A question mark. In both cases, we are inferring the presence of cognitive and sentient states from observable traces in the behavior of an organism. Because again, you can prove something by their trace and their interaction, even if you can't see them. On a different nature is the critique of Birch, who is a firm defendant of the principles that sentience can be studied scientifically. Birch compares developmental plasticity in plants and animals, aiming to disentangle sentience from developmental plasticity. We are fully in accord, I think is a better way if I would have said that, with this. Keeping the two apart is necessary regardless of the biological kingdom in question. Birch, nevertheless, concludes that the notion that plants make decisions must be metaphorical. Not possible for it to be biological, just metaphor. There it is. There is a little like, okay. Watching a bean shoot develop in time lapse is fascinating and spectacular. That's not patronizing at all. Likewise, there is remarkable developmental plasticity in animals, and watching any animal embryo develop in time lapse is fascinating and spectacular. I am sensing sarcasm. It is an astonishing feat of chemical and bioelectric signaling, coordination, and differential gene expression. It is very natural to talk metaphorically of an animal or plant making decisions or choices as it develops. Birch resorts to reasoning by analogy to support his conclusion that it's all metaphorical. Animal development is not normally guided by conscious choice. So the path to see, I like how he compares watching a bean shoot develop to an embryo develop. How did I not catch that before? It's an interesting comparison nonetheless. At what point does the plant become conscious? Which is the same question we ask as to what point do we become conscious? And there's some things we never become conscious on, because my hair grows, my legs grow, my waistline grows sometimes, all without my conscious thought. Well, maybe the waist a little bit, the conscious thought of what I eat. I had a whole little bag of dried mango. That's a mistake. I can't eat that stuff. I can't buy it, because either I buy it and put it in small containers and I only have like teeny tiny little amount. But if I eat a little bag, it was only a little bag. It was a bag about that big. But if I eat that bag, which I did, I feel horrible. I'd rather eat a pound of ice cream and I would feel better. Seriously. What is my body? My body is very weird. Okay. Animal development is not normally guided by conscious choice. So the path to seeing plasticity as evidence of sentience requires us to set aside one of the most basic, most fundamental pieces of common ground in animal sentience research. We are being asked to take seriously the possibility that while sentience has no role in guiding development in animal, sentience in plants does have this role. I think that that's a bit of a stretch. First of all, you are assuming that a sprouting bean plant is of the same age range as an embryo. Even though it might kind of seem that way, it's not a given. Remember, time is a factor that you have to keep into consideration. But there's so much more to Okay, let's see how they respond. 3 points are worth considering here. 1, the first point is the assumption that decisions must be inherently conscious. This claim contrasts with many approaches to decision-making in psychology and the cognitive sciences, which include non-conscious decisions as legitimate decisions. Huang et al., for example, have made a convincing case that not all decisions, including decisions made by human beings, are conscious. And there goes to Michelle's politician complex. There they are. The second point is the analogy between developmental plasticity in animals and in plants. For Birch, the comparison enough to make the idea that plants are sentient problematic. Birch believes that just as we do not consider the developmental plasticity in animals to be guided by sentience, we should not consider it to be so in plants. We think this is an oversimplification. Y'all think? Y'all think? Plants and animal development differ drastically from one another. That's what I was just saying, right? Just because like the bean plant seems like a baby, quote unquote, doesn't mean it's the same as a baby. There is a completely different need to develop yourself than in plants than there are in humans. Plants and animal development differ drastically from one another. Although plant development begins with embryogenesis, unlike animal development, it is in plants a post-embryonic, intermediate, and ongoing process. Apical meristematic tissues, through cell division and enlargement, continuously give rise to organs in adults throughout the vegetative phase of the life cycle of the plant. Plant development, I like how he quotes Taze. Like, I'm going to call you out and all these bad things, but here, where you're necessary, because Taze is plant physiologist, it makes sense. Plant development is in this way extremely plastic, with light, along with many other environmental parameters, allowing adult plants to adapt their patterns of growth and development to a wide range of conditions. Such developmental patterns exhibit markers of endogenous control and goal-directedness. Perhaps, as Birch argues, the developmental plasticity of plants is not guided by sentience, but comparing it with the developmental plasticity of animal misses some crucial differences. The third point is the reduction of plasticity in plants to developmental plasticity. The commentary by Henning and Mittelbach may prove useful here. It elaborates on a previous study reporting an intricate system of rewards and pollen distribution. Henning and Mittelbach discussed the evolution of plant behavior using, this is one of the papers I really enjoyed. I really liked this paper because it was one of the few papers that said, think outside the box, folks. Stop using animals as your guide. Think outside the box. So Loasaceae family as an example. Mittelbach et al. Had observed a progression in the complexity of floral behavior across different species, driven by interactions with pollinators. They suggest that this behavior involves controlled stamen movement. Crucially, their findings underscore that plants exhibit not just phenotypic plasticity, but behavioral plasticity as well. They interpret this as challenging the traditional distinction between plants and animals in terms of behavior and sentience. This was one of the best papers because, again, it gave a completely different approach, which I think we really need here. We now turn to other facets of Birch's analysis, especially his comparison between plants and invertebrates. Having addressed the neuro aspects in a previous section, we now turn our attention to the other distinction Birch highlights. Invertebrate research, in contrast to plant research, is not based on speculation. On the contrary, in studying invertebrates, Birch writes, one can directly aptly apply experimental approaches used to assess pain in mammals, such as conditioned place preference tests, and observe behavior that, if the animal were a mammal, these tests would certainly indicate pain. This leads to a challenge for plant sentience researchers. If you can demonstrate conditioned plants preference akin to that seen in octopi, many of us will have our confidence shaken. It is hard to tell whether SO&C see the difference they cite as raising the probability of sentience. In my view, it does not. I think, one, it is fair to be initially very skeptical of the idea of plant sentience. Why? I want a whole paper on why it's fair to be initially skeptical of the idea that plant is sentient, but it is ideally better to not be skeptical of AI sentience and animal sentience. Give it to me. Give it to me like I am 3 years old. Like, explain it to me like I'm a child. And 2, evidence obtained so far has not given us grounds to revise the possibility upwards. But 3, carefully attempts to obtain new evidence are welcome. I hope that SO&C in their responses can state whether they agree. If they disagree, I hope they can state which parts they disagree with. We are happy to take up the gauntlet. Seriously, these guys had way too much fun with this response. Not necessarily because we are certain about demonstrating, say, conditioned responses in plants, but simply because we are curious to find out. As of now, that is so much shade. So much. It's shady. That is like scototropism shady. Like, let's just go towards the dark. Let's put you completely into the dark. As of now, there is no need to compromise any conviction that plants lack sentience, given that the evidence is still inconclusive. I think you're just being nice by calling it inconclusive because you don't want to argue with them. It is now time to explore the markers or indicators themselves. Dung consolidates recent research on markets that are often cited as compelling evidence for animal sentience. Should plants meet some of these criteria, they could also start to be deemed sentient. See what he did there? Sneaky. In our target article, Dung highlights two such potential indicators. One, that plants seem to engage in complex decision-making processes, integrating and weighing information from different states and context-dependent trade-offs to give priority to some responses over others. And two, that plants can learn by habituation and association. Given that all five references address motivational trade-off behavior in non-human animals, Dung examines plant decision-making and risk sensitivity and concludes that there is evidence of similar kind of trade-offs in plants. However, Dung focuses on studies where motivational trade-offs are combined with elements of memory, which in turn increases the demand for information integration. As we have previously discussed decision-making, we will center our attention on memory and associative memory in this context because they keep talking about decision-making and it still gets pushed back. Dung writes that he knows of no evidence that trade-offs that rely on associative memory can be performed by C. elegans, let alone plants. Loy provides an excellent review of experiments on invertebrates, plants, and unicellular organisms, suggesting evidence of associative learning among invertebrates. Still, we concur that there is insufficient proof for this in single-celled organisms and plants. You guys are too nice sometimes. I still say you should double down all over the place. As we explained in our target article, we cannot report conclusive evidence for or against associative learning in plants either. They're so cautious sometimes. Currently, we are trying to replicate independently Galliano et al.'s experiments on learnings by association. However, there are serious deficiencies in Galliano et al.'s study. A substantial number of methodological factors must be addressed prior to settling the issue. Alongside the exact replication, we are attempting a conceptual replication which addresses all these shortcomings. Dung concludes, if plants do not meet the criteria for attributing sentience to animal, it's hard to see how attributing sentience to plants can be justified. Maybe because, physiologically speaking, we are talking about completely different species with different physiology, different anatomies, and probably different ways of approaching the concept of sentience. But that's just me. That's just me. Again, we fully agree. I do not. I do not. I do not. This is why our target article, to reiterate, was titled Plant Sentience. Note the question mark. I think that they just got tired by this point of the thing, and now they're just conceding a bunch of shit that I wouldn't have conceded. I would have conceded some of the stuff on the top, and I wouldn't have conceded this stuff. And this is why our aim is to focus on doing the science. Do we have the empirical evidence that plants meet the criteria listed in Snedden et al. And all the others? No, we don't. But that's because plants are not animals. Do we want to pursue that line of research and find out which criteria plants might meet, if any? Yes, we do. I want somebody who is going to speak for plants, by plants, as plants. Can we please do that? Can we please do that? Dung urges us to move from simple forms of learning, including forms of classical conditioning that do not require sentience, to more complex forms such as trace conditioning. In training, however, there is a gap without any stimulus between the CS and the US. Therefore, a subsequent trace of conditioned stimulus is necessary to connect the interval before it gets associated to the unconditioned stimulus. Recent literature reports trace conditioning in Drosophila, and in honeybees and other insects. Dung writes that if findings of classical conditioning in plants can be replicated, this would not do much to support the view that plants are sentient. So, first of all, it's you're not even there. And second, it's even if you got there, it's still not enough. Again, we are happy to take up the gauntlet. Please tell me that you're going to have a hammer like behind your back right now and you're just ready. Our aim is first to find out whether plants can learn by simple association, and if so, whether plants exhibit more sophisticated forms of conditioned responses, such as trace conditioning. One way or another, we applaud Dung's observation. There's a reason why this person's called Dung. I just want that on the record. And then I'll deny that I said it, but still. When plants have a particular behavioral capacity, we often take that as evidence that the behavioral capacity does not require sentience, rather than as evidence that plants are sentient. This methodological issue would benefit from explicit discussion in the future. Yes, especially since you're one of the proponents of it. Or did I read that wrong all this time? We have noticed skeptics taking the opposite ad hoc approach on numerous occasions in the past. This is not the case of Bacciadonna. They flag the aforementioned lack of essential controls or failure to produce replicable results, but they would agree with us insofar as agnosticism about sentience should not deter us from investigating unexpected new capacities in plants. Yes, it should. It should not deter us. In fact, Bacciadonna conclude that although associative learning is yet to be proved in plants, research is worth doing. Yes, it is. This time with properly designed and replicable experiments. Dude, we are talking about plant physiology. There is no properly designed. We do the best we can, fixing it with every iteration of it, because you got to start somewhere. We appreciate their openness. This represents the constructive spirit of adversarial collaboration in science that we advocate. Bacciadonna et al. Comment on both Galeano et al.'s study and the one conducted by Bahandawat et al. On adverse conditioning in Arabidopsis thaliana. Because we have already explained where we stand concerning the former study, we will only comment on the latter. As Bacciadonna et al. Explain, Bandawat et al.'s study lacking key controls does not support associative learning in Arabidopsis. We agree, but a proper study is going to take time. For one thing, on top of the considerations that Bacciadonna et al. Mentioned, before inferring associative learning, classical conditioning, it is important to evaluate the possibility of pseudo-conditioning, something that Bandawat et al.'s study does not control for, among other issues. To conclude this section, we would like to consider the proposal advanced by Burgos and Castañeda. They present panpsychism as a wider framework within which to contemplate pansentience, prompting us to reflect on panpsychism, which is totally worth reading up on. Whether you believe it or not is a whole other thing. I mean, everybody has the theory of consciousness that they observe, that they ascribe to, but panpsychism seems to match what many people in a certain niche area, demographic, I don't know what the right word is, feel inherently inside of them, outside of their literal mind. And its potential consequences. Burgos and Castañeda state, everything is sentient, not just animals and plants, but also viruses, bacteria, single cells, even inorganic objects like tables, chairs, hats, rocks, computers, and doorknobs. Interesting list. The proposition that sentience could be a universal attribute is a general philosophical stance. This is, I think there's an is missing. This is an intriguing outlook. The focus of our target article is more specifically on plant life. We think that each entity, be it plant, animal, or electron, warrants an individual and thorough investigation to ascertain the existence or non-existence of sentience. Burgos and Castañeda challenge us to consider Goff's constructive panpsychism, according to which Electron sentience is vastly simpler than plant sentience, which in turn is vastly simpler than rat sentience, etc. Simpler sentient entities combine to form more complex sentient entities. Regrettably, we are unable to articulate our position on Gough's panpsychist theory, as we have not yet engaged with the 2017 Gough text, because it's long. A further question, however, is posed by Burgos and Castañeda. SONC would be likely to ask whether electrons display the behaviors that they take as indicators of sentience. There is as yet no evidence for an affirmative answer, although there is some evidence of Pavlovian conditioning in certain inorganic systems. That was an interesting paper. I liked that one. This is a fascinating observation. We welcome the opportunity to respond. We might indeed consider biomimetic inspiration, as suggested by Burgos and Castañeda, such as a synthetic material that emulates algorithmically learning. However, there is a clear distinction between algorithm-based biomimetic inspiration and the actual discovery of Pavlovian-type conditioning in inorganic systems at the implementational level. To be clear, there is no fundamental barrier to science exploring associative learning in inorganic forms. Such an endeavor, however, would encounter limitations on two fronts. One, not all forms of associative learning would qualify as indicators of sentience. We would need to identify enhanced forms of associative. I still don't understand this. I don't know. You've got to cover me dense. Maybe I am just dense. But there are just some things that I do not understand, because I still don't understand how we could have these tests and we can say this is the test of sentience and then think that that test needs to apply to everybody. How can that even be? Like, how do we know what sentience looks like in certain types of beings? I just feel like we need to recognize sentience in very different ways. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. Two, whereas future experiments might confirm the presence of unlimited associative learning or trace conditioning in various taxa phyla, or even in inorganic systems, the latter would still need to adhere to standard experimental controls. To put it simply, a robot equipped with a Pavlovian polymer demonstrating a conditioned response would have to undergo a series of routine tests. Consequently, we would anticipate that in such a polymer-based learning robots, the intensity of both the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus would correlate with the effectiveness of the training. Similarly, the effectiveness should increase with shorter intervals between the stimuli and a higher number of pairings. In the same vein, we would expect the conditioned response to weaken and eventually vanish when the stimuli are no longer paired, and for the conditioned response to be triggered by stimuli sufficiently similar to those used during training. If all these conditions were met in plants, it would provide solid evidence that associative learning has occurred. The same criteria would apply to any other system, whether biological or artificial. Nevertheless, we maintain that this would merely be an initial step toward creating actuators that algorithmically mimic elementary aspects of learning. Whew. All right, let's see if we can, I don't know how many pages we have left. Related to these concerns, Vijverdu's, I think that's how it is, Du's approach to studying minimal cognition in entities such as slime molds may provide insight into more complex cognitive systems. Whether natural, hybrid, or entirely artificial, we appreciate his insightful commentary on this potential intersection. The perspective on unconventional computing and the role of plants in this field is both fascinating and stimulating. Specifically, unconventional computing aims to bridge two main areas: the application of engineering techniques to biological materials, and the reverse engineering of biological systems to comprehend their complex information processing capabilities. We agree that this could lead to groundbreaking solutions and a more profound understanding of cognition across different entities. However, while unconventional computing methods are indeed inspired by biological processes, it is crucial to delineate how these methods are directly relevant to plant cognition. A more thorough examination of this relationship would solidify the case for plant-based computation. Elaborating further is nonetheless beyond the scope of this response, which makes sense. I mean, they're like, this is really interesting. Here's some considerations, but we're just not there yet. That's not the conversation we want to have, which is understandable. Okay, I think we're near. I'm so curious. Are we near the end? Yeah, we're really near the end. Not because I don't enjoy this, but because, I've already been here almost 2 hours. Okay, where? Ethical implications. Ooh, we're going to end on a high. A number of commentators chose to discuss the ethical implications of plant sentience in line with nobody is really discussing the true ethical implications. Okay, let's just be honest. Let's just be honest. We're not going there. We're afraid of going there. In line with our observation that the implications for our treatment of plants will need to be considered too. Special mention is required for Milbourne, whose commentary is fully devoted to such implications. This is especially needed considering that previous discussions have typically ignored taxa outside the animal kingdom. Milbourne writes, part of taking the possibility of plant sentience seriously is to ask what its ethical consequences would be. However, if plant sentience ultimately challenges veganism on ethical grounds, it would not alter any future evidence supporting plant sentience. I'm rereading that line. If plant sentience ultimately challenges veganism on ethical grounds, it would not alter any future evidence supporting plant sentience. Okay, that's true. It only would alter the possible biases that get introduced by the humans conducting the studies. The question of whether plants are sentient is independent of the complexities it may introduce, and we must keep both issues separated. We should, but if we don't call them out, then scientists are running under a conditioned bias without ever acknowledging that that conditioning bias could exist within them. Echoing this concern, Broom suggests that plant sentience is not only empirically incorrect, but potentially harmful to the efforts to protect the welfare of sentient beings. The benefits of the concept of sentience would be eroded if it were used for too wide a range of organisms. I totally remember this paper. It was like somebody who's here, you think, oh, cool, we're touching on something. And then he's like, but it would be so disruptive that we should just pretend that this shit doesn't exist. What? This is the kind of guy who thinks that if panpsychism was to be proved, or this person is panpsychism would be proved, it would be horrible because it means that if everything is sentient, then nothing has value. We appreciate the discussions unfolding in many ethicist circles, and we do not want to hinder the efforts made by animal welfarists. However, we think it is important to remind the reader about already introduced between effectively neutral sentient states and effectively balanced ones, independently of the organism's kingdom of origin in the tree of life. In our view, the question of interest for ethicists should be whether there is any form of pain or stress inflicted upon the organism that eventually becomes our food, and if inflicting such harm is truly necessary. The possibility that plants may be able to feel some states does not necessarily mean that their sentience needs to be equated to that of other than human animals, for they may not be able to have effectively balanced felt states. I would take it even a step further, which I talk about all the time, which is just because a plant is sentient, we should not eat said plant, does not mean that we should not have this type of relationship that we do today, where plants are our clothing and plants are our tables and plants are our materials. That is not what happens necessarily. It is, though, how do we enter into a co-creative relationship with plants where their bodies have given us the opportunity to create all these different things, but we need to stick ourselves back into the chain, into the circle of life, and to co-create with plants a new reality. It just becomes a different conversation, not a conversation of, oh no, we need to treat all plants just the same as the conversation with animals. We need to treat us all the same, like with humans, with this and with that. No, it's another one. It's who are each one of us when we accept that we are all sentient and conscious, and we are all aware, and we are all part of this unfolding of life together. Furthermore, the question of whether a significant portion of living entities are sentient should not be determined based on the challenges it may pose. We think it is unjustified to refuse to consider seriously the possibility that plants may be sentient, only because this may force us to rethink our way of living. One way or another, were plants to be sentient, Tiffin notes, the ethical problems raised are insurmountable and would not threaten the now proven case for animal sentient. Exactly. These shouldn't be in competition with one another. We think it is unacceptable to reject the hypothesis of plant sentience before engaging in serious investigations because we are afraid of its potential ethical consequences. We disagree, however, with the suggestion of Mastinu that sentience would not add anything to the plant kingdom. Seriously? Seriously? Have you not seen the way that we are treating the planets? Like, it would add a whole fuck ton of consciousness and understanding in humans versus other beings. It's the complexity and importance of photosynthetic organisms is independent of whether they are sentient. But by that logic, should we conclude mutatis mutandis, and that the complexity and importance of non-photosynthetic heterotropic organisms, such as animals, are independent of their sentience? We struggle to understand why sentience would matter for one group and not for the other. As Struick notes, assuming that plants are sentient might make our moral responsibility and respect toward plants even more urgent, raising the question whether moral responsibility and respect should be accorded to them, to kin, collectively as a community and also as individuals. Yes, 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 that right there. That right there. Coining the expression plant liberation raises the concern for Brooks Priback that it may attract members of the public who are genuinely concerned about the possibility of plant sentience and will use the information to perform a critical self-evaluation towards greater personal integrity. But mostly, it will be useful to fuel sensationalism, misinformation, and moral laziness. Oh my goodness. And you want to claim that you're conscious? Our antidote to sensationalism, misinformation, and moral laziness is education. The potential for misinterpretation on the part of many only underscores the need for engaged pedagogical efforts, not a dismissal of plant sentience based on potential misconceptions. Because if that's the case, then maybe some people shouldn't be considered intelligent either. Philosophers and activists should take this job seriously, in our view. We anticipate that future discussions will include ethical considerations related to plants, or at a minimal, that the insights herewith discussed will influence policies aimed at flora conservation and at flora relationship. How about relationship? After all, caring for plants will ultimately be advantageous for everyone. Number 10, conclusion. Let us close by expressing our gratitude for the engagement and insights provided by all commentators. We reiterate the importance of continued dialogue and research on the topic of plant sentience. As noted by Tiffin, just a few decades ago, it was thought inconceivable that insects were sentient. Yet continuing research in that field has tended firmly in the direction of recognizing insect sentience. So please don't step on ants just to step on them, and don't kill spiders. Take them outside. That's all you have to do. Would be irrational to deny the possibility that future work could someday prove that plants feel too. I'm shutting up. We agree that much more discussion is still needed before accepting the idea of plant sentience. Really? I don't agree. However, this should not deter us in our pursuit of knowledge. In this sense, we concur with Valverdu that I don't know. It is important to explore such a new field of research despite the incompleteness of the empirical support for it. Of course, because how does a new field become complete if you don't support it? In essence, we disagree with those who flatly dismiss the potential for plant sentience for reasons mentioned and join with Yilmaz in promoting collaborative research between plant and animal researchers. We hope this series of exchanges has not only clarified but also enriched the ongoing discussion by encouraging forward thinking. If history teaches us anything about science, it's the value of boldness. I'm all for the boldness, man. I'm all for the boldness. Well, that's it, folks. We did it. And you know what? I think I had already said this from the very beginning. I mean, in knowing Paco, they're going to be cautious. And actually, they came out swinging a lot more than I expected. I did not expect them to swing at all for this. So I am impressed that they swung at all. And I'm impressed with the overall calmness with the beautiful amounts of shade. There's just a certain amount of scototropic work. I love that word. That really going towards the dark every once in a while. And I think they need it. I think that every once in a while they needed to give them the middle finger. I think that every once in a while they need to slap around a few scientists. And I think it is ridiculous to think that we have academics out there who would flatly say that something is not possible when the whole point of science is that further evidence could always change what we know today. So I am excited to see where we're going to go after this. I'm also excited to start something new. So next week, just so that you know, we have plant consciousness. We do not have a plant consciousness commentary because it is the last Friday of our 2-month period in the Plant Wisdom Book Club. So we will be having our final discussion of Chase Mimosa, The Psychology of Plants, which is a really controversial book, let's just say it, because some people love it, some people don't. And this is why the final discussion is going to be so interesting. I love the history in it, and we will see. So if you want to come and join us, Plant Wisdom Book Club, just look it up. There's also links in the show notes, also here in the description. And we would love to have you with us to come and read. We're voting for our next book right now, and I'm excited to see what gets chosen. And then it is not a given that I will have something the week after, because I have a very important guest who will be coming to Damanhur to prepare for something that I hope we'll be able to announce in the next coming months. It is a very big project that we will be, filming later in this year, and that hopefully will be released in early 2026. So stay tuned for details on that. I'm very excited to be part of another project of this sort. And yeah, if you have any questions, yeah, Michelle says that the book we're reading is an old white guy book. That is a true statement. But if you have any questions at all, or you want to engage in further discussions on this topic, please come and join us in the Naturally Conscious community. As you know, the Naturally Conscious community is the only online community that is completely dedicated to evolving plant-human relations and co-creating with Plant King Home. And this is the kind of stuff we talk about all the time. These are all of our programs. They're all around how do we expand our communication and our conversation with plants. And more than that, our co-creation with plants. And how does that help us become better humans as a result, individually as well as collectively? So join us over in naturallyconsciouscommunity.com. And I am looking forward to seeing you all again. Also, if you want to take this type of learning to the next level, and you really want to work with plants deeply in the development of your own life for confidence, to understand how all your crazy ideas work together, or just to make a big change in your life, to really evolve your own life, please reach out to me. I would be happy to speak with you. I would love to work with you and to help you bring the plants more consciously into your life. So that's it for me. Go check out the older episodes if you haven't seen them, or if you have, then go check out the podcast, Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. You have the Naturally Conscious community. I mean, there's all kinds of good stuff for evolving our human-plant relations. Until then, remember to resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it for me, Tigrilla Gardenia. I'm out. Bye.